Harold, you need to get over here right now. My neighbor Diane screamed so loudly through the phone that I almost dropped it between the seats of my truck. There's a man in a black suit inside your house, and your daughter just let him in. I remember gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles hurt because my daughter Melissa thought I was halfway to Arizona that night. She thought I was gone for 12 days. The truth was I'd never even left Naperville. I was sitting in a cheap motel less than 20 minutes away from my own home, listening to my family through hidden microphones I'd installed 3 days earlier. "Are you sure it's Melissa?" I asked. Diane sounded offended. "Harold, I've lived next to you for 15 years. I know your daughter's car." Then she lowered her voice and said something that still makes my stomach turn when I think about it. "I don't think they know someone's watching them." Before I tell you what happened that night, I just want to say this. If this story truly resonates with you, maybe take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if stories like this speak to your heart. And I'd really love to know where you're watching from tonight. Leave your city, your country, and your local time down in the comments because honestly, seeing people from all over the world listening to an old man ramble about his family somehow makes nights feel a little less lonely. My name is Harold Whitman. I'm 72 years old, and this was the week I realized my daughter had already started treating me like I was dead. It all started about a year after my wife Ellen passed away. 43 years of marriage. And then one morning I was standing in a hospital room in Downers Grove holding her sweater while a nurse explained paperwork I couldn't even hear because my ears were ringing too badly. After the funeral, the house got quiet in a way I still can't explain. You notice stupid little things after somebody's gone. The refrigerator hum gets louder. Floorboards sound sharper. Even the grandfather clock starts sounding aggressive at 2 in the morning. Melissa started visiting more after that. At first I thought she was worried about me. She'd stop by every Sunday carrying soup or groceries I never asked for. "Dad, you can't live off frozen dinners," she'd say while cleaning my kitchen counters without looking at me. Sometimes she'd bring her husband Brent along. Brent always acted polite in that careful fake way salesmen do. Firm handshake. Big smile. Too much eye contact. "How's the blood pressure, Harold?" He'd ask every single visit like he was checking mileage on a used truck. I ignored little things at first because that's what parents do. We explain things away. Melissa asking where I kept my spare house key. Melissa asking whether I'd updated my will after Ellen died. Melissa asking if I'd ever considered downsizing. That word started showing up constantly. Downsizing. "Dad, this place is too much house for one person." "Dad, these stairs aren't safe at your age." "Dad, you could sell this place for a fortune right now." One night, they stayed for dinner, and Brent walked around my living room slowly staring at the walls like he was mentally measuring them. Then he laughed and said, "Shame if a beautiful house like this ended up tied up in probate someday." Melissa immediately looked down at her wine glass. Nobody spoke for about 5 seconds. I still remember hearing ice clink in Brent's drink. Then Melissa forced a smile and said, "Brent's just joking, Dad." But he wasn't joking. I knew he wasn't. After that dinner, I started noticing things that made my chest feel tight. My checkbook wasn't where I left it. File drawers slightly open. Papers moved an inch or two out of place. Tiny things. Small enough to make me wonder if grief was messing with my head. I actually apologized to Melissa one afternoon for feeling suspicious. I said, "Maybe I'm just getting old." And she touched my arm and smiled in this soft, patient voice I used to trust completely. "Dad," she said, "you're imagining things." That should have comforted me. Instead, it terrified me. Because for the first time in my life, my own daughter sounded like someone trying to calm down a confused stranger instead of her father. And 3 nights later, I heard something through one of the hidden microphones that made me realize I was already far too late. The thing about Melissa is that she was not raised in a cruel home. That is what made all of this harder for me to understand. When she was little, she used to wait by the front window every evening around 5:30 because that was when my truck would come down Willow Ridge Drive after work. Ellen told me once that Melissa could recognize the sound of my engine from 3 blocks away. I still remember one winter when she was maybe 7 years old standing in the driveway wearing snow boots on the wrong feet because she was too excited to wait inside. "Daddy, Daddy, look what I made at school," she yelled while waving this crooked paper snowflake missing half the corners. Back then she used to hold my hand everywhere. Grocery stores, church parking lots, little league games. She hated loud thunder and would crawl into our bed during storms with that tiny pink blanket she carried for years. So when people ask me now if there were signs all along, I honestly do not know what to tell them. Because for most of her life, she was just my daughter. Somewhere along the way something changed, and I still cannot fully explain where the line was crossed. I do know when the resentment started creeping in though. Melissa was 16 when Ellen got sick the first time. Not cancer yet. Heart trouble. Long appointments in Chicago. Prescription costs. Stress. I started working Saturdays again to cover medical bills, and suddenly I was missing things. School plays. Volleyball games. One afternoon, Melissa slammed her bedroom door so hard a family picture fell off the hallway wall. I knocked and asked, "What is going on with you lately?" She shouted through the door, "You care more about Mom than anybody else in this house." At the time, I thought it was just teenage anger. Ellen cried after hearing that. I remember sitting beside her at the kitchen table around midnight while she folded laundry slowly and stared at nothing. She said, "She does not mean it." But I think part of Ellen worried Melissa actually did. Things improved for a while after college. Melissa married Brent at 28 in this huge expensive ceremony they absolutely could not afford. I helped pay for almost all of it. $40,000 between the venue, flowers, catering, and rehearsal dinner. I never complained because fathers do not keep score with their kids. At least they are not supposed to. Still, little comments started slipping out over the years. Tiny sharp things disguised as jokes. One Christmas, Brent walked through my garage and whistled at my old restored Corvette. "Must be nice to have retirement money," he said while Melissa laughed awkwardly beside him. Another time, Melissa saw me writing checks at the dining room table and asked, "How much is left on the mortgage?" I told her the house had been paid off since 2003. She got very quiet after that. Then there was the Thanksgiving incident 3 years ago. I cannot stop thinking about that night lately. Ellen was still alive then, already weak from chemotherapy, barely eating anything except mashed potatoes and soup. Melissa showed up 2 hours late complaining about traffic while carrying this expensive designer purse Brent had apparently bought her. During dinner, Ellen quietly asked if they were still struggling financially because Brent had switched jobs again. Melissa rolled her eyes and said, "Maybe we would not struggle so much if certain people stopped acting like they are taking their savings into the grave." The whole table went silent. Even Brent looked uncomfortable after she said it. Ellen just lowered her fork slowly and stared down at her plate. I remember saying, "Melissa, that is enough." And she immediately snapped back, "I am just being honest." Honest. That word stayed with me. Because from that point on, every conversation with her started feeling like a negotiation disguised as concern. The strange part was she still acted loving afterward. She still hugged me goodbye, still brought soup, still texted me reminders about my blood pressure medication. That was what confused me the most. It felt like watching two versions of my daughter fighting each other right in front of me. And 3 nights before I checked into that motel, I accidentally overheard a conversation between Melissa and Brent in my own kitchen that made me realize one of those versions had finally won. The conversation happened on a Tuesday evening in March while rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows. I had made coffee after dinner and was sitting in the den pretending to watch a Cubs replay when I heard voices drifting in from the kitchen. Melissa and Brent thought I was upstairs showering. Their voices were low at first, the kind people use when they think they are being careful. Then Brent said something that made me stop breathing for a second. "You need to find out if he updated the paperwork after your mother died." There was a pause. I remember the sound of ice shifting in somebody's glass. Melissa answered quietly, "I already checked the desk downstairs. Nothing's there." I stayed perfectly still in my recliner. Brent let out this frustrated sigh and said, "Then it is probably in the safe." Melissa laughed nervously. "You make me sound like a criminal." Brent replied, "I am making you sound prepared." I do not know why those words affected me so much, but they did. Maybe because neither of them sounded guilty. They sounded organized. Like this was already an ongoing conversation between them. I stood there in the dark hallway for nearly 5 minutes afterward while they kept talking about interest rates, debt, and refinancing. At one point, Brent actually said, "If we get the house before the market drops, we can probably clear 400 grand after renovations." Not if. When? Before that night, I think part of me still wanted to believe I was overreacting. After that conversation, something inside me shifted quietly into place. The strange thing is I did not storm into the kitchen. Old Harold would have. Old Harold hated confrontation so much he usually exploded only after holding things in too long. But this time I did something different. I walked upstairs silently, sat on the edge of my bed, and just listened to the rain for a while. Then I started thinking, really thinking. The next morning, Melissa called around 9:30 while I was changing the oil in my truck. "Hey, Dad," she said cheerfully. "How are you feeling today?" I looked down at my hands covered in black motor oil and said, "Fine." She hesitated like she was waiting for more. "You sound tired." "Did I?" Another pause. "Well, just make sure you are taking your medication." I wiped my hands slowly with a shop towel and asked, "Melissa, if something happened to me tomorrow, what would you do with this house?" The silence after that question lasted long enough for me to hear birds outside the garage. Then she laughed softly. "Dad, why would you ask me that?" "Just curious. Honestly, I would probably want you somewhere safer before anything happened." I noticed she never answered the actual question. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. I received a certified letter from an investment company in Chicago informing me that an old commercial property partnership I had forgotten about decades ago had finally been dissolved after a legal dispute. My share came out to a little over $680,000 after taxes. I sat at the dining room table rereading the number 3 times because I genuinely thought they had made a mistake. Ellen and I invested in that property back in the 1990s with 2 friends from church. We always assumed the money was gone forever. For the first time since Ellen died, I felt something close to relief. I even smiled a little. I thought maybe I could finally travel. Maybe buy a small cabin near the lake like Ellen always wanted. Maybe breathe again. Then my phone rang an hour later. "Melissa." "Dad," she said excitedly. "You are never going to believe this, but Brent saw some public filing online connected to your old property case." "Is it true?" I felt my stomach tighten instantly. I had not told anybody about the letter. Not one person. How did Brent know about that? I asked quietly. Melissa stumbled over her words. "Oh, he just follows real estate stuff online sometimes." I looked across my empty kitchen toward Ellen's old coffee mug sitting beside the sink. Then for the first time in my life, I lied to my daughter without hesitation. "It was nothing," I said calmly. "Just paperwork." Melissa got very quiet after that. And later that night, when I walked past the downstairs office, I noticed the drawer where I kept my financial documents had been opened again. After that phone call, things changed fast. Too fast. Melissa started showing up almost every day, and suddenly she was interested in parts of my life she had ignored for years. One afternoon, she brought over takeout from Portillo's and acted unusually cheerful from the moment she walked in. "Dad, you should really think about letting me help organize your paperwork," she said while unpacking fries on a plate like we were having a normal family lunch. "You have got tax stuff everywhere in this house." I looked around the kitchen. The counters were clean. The mail was stacked neatly beside the refrigerator exactly where I always kept it. "I know where my things are," I said calmly. She smiled too quickly. "I am just trying to help." Brent started coming over more too. He suddenly wanted to fix things around the house that had never bothered him before. One evening, he spent 20 minutes inspecting my basement furnace without me asking. Another night, he walked through the garage studying shelves and storage bins while pretending to make conversation. "You ever think about selling some of this old stuff?" he asked while tapping one of my tool cabinets. "Collectors pay crazy money these days." I noticed he kept glancing toward the office hallway while talking. Around that time, my sister Carol called me from Milwaukee, sounding uncomfortable. "Harold," she said carefully, "Melissa mentioned you have been forgetting things lately." I nearly dropped the phone. "What?" Carol hesitated. "She said she is worried about you living alone. She said you seemed confused last week." I sat down slowly at the edge of my bed because suddenly everything made sense in the ugliest possible way. Melissa was not just snooping anymore. She was building a story, planting little seeds, quietly preparing people to doubt me. "Carol," I said softly, "have I ever sounded confused to you?" "No," she admitted immediately. "That is why I thought it sounded strange." After we hung up, I walked downstairs and stared out the back window for almost an hour. My own daughter was turning concern into a weapon, and the worst part was how believable it sounded. Old widower, lives alone, recently lost his wife, forgetful, isolated. People accept those stories easily because they make sense. That night, Melissa stopped by again with Brent. I could feel tension sitting underneath their smiles the second they walked through the front door. During dinner, Brent casually mentioned assisted living communities near Oak Brook. "Some of those places are incredible now," he said while cutting into his chicken parmesan. "Golf simulators, fitness centers, 24-hour nurses. I looked directly at him and asked, "Are you shopping for one?" Melissa jumped in too quickly. "Dad, nobody is saying you need that now." Now, that word landed heavily between us. I set my fork down and said something I had never said to my daughter before. "You two seem very interested in where I live lately." Silence filled the room immediately. Melissa blinked hard. Brent forced out a laugh. "Come on, Harold. We are just trying to look out for you." Normally, I would have backed down right there. Smoothed things over. Apologized for making things awkward. But I did not this time. I just kept looking at them quietly until Melissa finally looked away first. After dinner, they left unusually fast. Around 10 that night, I heard a car outside and peeked through the curtains. Melissa's SUV was parked across the street with the headlights off. I watched Brent get out and walk slowly toward my mailbox. He opened it, looked through my mail, then casually walked back to the SUV like it was the most normal thing in the world. My chest felt cold watching it happen. The next morning, I checked my voicemail and found a message from my bank asking me to confirm whether I had requested information about adding authorized users to one of my accounts. I had not. I called the bank immediately. "Sir," the representative said politely, "someone claiming to be your daughter called yesterday asking about account access in case of medical emergency." I felt something inside me finally crack when I heard that. Not anger, not even shock anymore. Just this awful hollow feeling like the family I thought I had was quietly disappearing right in front of me. And later that same afternoon, I walked into my office and discovered my safe door slightly open. The safe was built into the wall behind a framed photograph from our 20th wedding anniversary. Ellen picked the hiding spot herself back in the 80s because she said burglars only look for obvious places. When I saw the safe door cracked open that afternoon, my first thought was not anger. It was embarrassment. Real deep embarrassment. Because suddenly I realized somebody had been standing in my private office going through the last pieces of my life that still felt personal. I opened the safe slowly, expecting everything to be gone, but most of the documents were still there. The deed, insurance folders, old savings bonds, Ellen's jewelry box. But the stack of estate planning papers had clearly been disturbed. Pages out of order. One folder bent backward. Somebody had even smudged fingerprints across the front page. I sat there in my office chair staring at those papers for a long time before finally calling Melissa. She answered on the third ring, sounding distracted. "Hey, Dad." I kept my voice calm. "Were you in my office today?" Silence. Then immediate defensiveness. "What?" "No. The safe was open." "Dad, are you seriously accusing me of something?" I rubbed my forehead slowly and said, "I am asking a question." She let out this exhausted sigh like I was inconveniencing her. "Brent stopped by to check the sump pump because you said the basement smelled damp last week." I never said that. Not once. "Did he open my safe?" Another pause. "Why would Brent even care about your safe?" That sentence told me everything because she answered too fast. I should have pushed harder right then. Instead, I said quietly, "All right," and ended the call. About an hour later, my phone started buzzing again. First Melissa, then Brent, then my sister Carol, then even my nephew Jason. Somehow, within 60 minutes, the story had spread through the family that I was confused and accusing people of stealing from me. Carol sounded genuinely worried. "Harold," she said carefully, "Melissa says you have been acting paranoid lately." That word hit me harder than I expected. Paranoid. I sat there at the kitchen table listening to my own family slowly decide I could not be trusted with my own judgment anymore. Over the next few days, it got worse. Melissa started texting me constantly. "Did you take your blood pressure meds today? You forgot our lunch plans yesterday. We never had lunch plans. Maybe you should talk to somebody, Dad." I saved every message, every voicemail. One night around 11, I received an email from Melissa with the subject line, "Resources for Senior Living." Attached were brochures for retirement communities and memory care facilities. Memory care. I stared at those words while the refrigerator hummed softly behind me in the dark kitchen. Then another email came through 20 minutes later from Brent pretending to smooth things over. "We only want what is best for you, Harold. Melissa is under a lot of stress worrying about you alone in that big house." Worrying about me. That became the official family narrative. Melissa even convinced people at church. A few days later, an older couple named Ron and Beverly stopped me after Sunday service. Beverly squeezed my hand gently and said, "Do not be ashamed if you need help, Harold. I remember smiling politely while feeling something collapse inside me, because that was when I understood how fast a lie spreads once people decide it sounds compassionate. I tried fixing things at first. I really did. I wrote Melissa a 3-page letter by hand explaining how hurt I felt and asking her directly if there was something she wanted to tell me. I told her we could talk honestly. No judgment. No fighting. I even apologized for becoming distant after Ellen died. She never answered the letter. 3 days later, I received a voicemail instead. Dad, everybody is really concerned about you right now. Maybe stop spiraling and let people help you. Spiraling. That word stayed in my head all night. I stopped sleeping after that. I would sit in the living room at 2 in the morning staring at the grandfather clock while the house creaked around me. The strange thing about betrayal is that it does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it happens quietly through concerned voices, sympathetic smiles, and people speaking gently while they slowly erase your credibility piece by piece. And by the end of that week, I realized I was completely alone inside my own family. About 2 weeks after the safe incident, I stopped answering most phone calls. Not because I was angry anymore. I was just tired. There is a kind of exhaustion that settles into you when people keep questioning your reality long enough. You start rehearsing conversations in your head before they even happen. You start second-guessing your own memory over tiny things. Did I lock the back door? Did I already pay that electric bill? Did I really tell Melissa something and forget? That was the part that scared me most. Not what they were doing. The fact that part of me was beginning to wonder if maybe they were succeeding. One afternoon, I found myself standing in the laundry room staring at the washing machine for almost a full minute because I genuinely could not remember why I walked in there. I remember leaning against the wall afterward thinking, maybe this is how it starts. Maybe grief really does hollow people out slowly. Then I looked down and realized I was holding the dog leash from the golden retriever Ellen and I buried 11 years ago. I had walked into the laundry room because I had found the leash in a drawer and forgot where I meant to put it. That moment hit me harder than anything Melissa or Brent had done because I suddenly understood something important. I was not losing my mind. I was lonely. There is a difference. Loneliness creates fog. Silence stretches thoughts out until they start echoing. After Ellen died, days blurred together inside that house. Sometimes the only voice I heard before noon was the weather forecast on television. I think Melissa noticed that vulnerability before I did. Around that same time, fewer people started calling me back. My nephew Jason stopped answering texts completely. Carol still spoke to me, but cautiously now, like she was afraid of upsetting me. Even church felt different. Conversations became softer around me. Shorter. One Sunday after service, Pastor Reynolds touched my shoulder gently and said, "You know there is no shame in letting family help. Make difficult decisions." I smiled politely and said, "What decisions would those be?" He looked uncomfortable immediately. "Melissa is just worried about you living alone, Harold." There it was again. Concern. Always concern. I drove home that afternoon with the radio off because I could not stand hearing another voice pretending everything was normal. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Melissa's SUV already parked there. She had let herself into the house again. I walked inside quietly and found her standing in my office holding one of Ellen's old photo albums. "What are you doing?" I asked. She jumped slightly. "Dad, you scared me." You did not answer my question. She stared at me for a second, then sighed dramatically and sat down at the dining room table like she was the exhausted parent in the situation. "We need to talk honestly," she said. "About what?" "About reality." I actually laughed a little when she said that because it sounded rehearsed, like something Brent helped script. She folded her hands together and lowered her voice. "Dad, people are getting worried." "Which people?" "Everybody. Name one." That seemed to throw her off. For the first time in weeks, I saw irritation flash across her face instead of fake patience. "Why are you making this difficult?" she asked quietly. And that was the moment something finally clicked inside me. Not anger. Clarity. Because healthy people do not slowly isolate someone while calling it love. Healthy people do not rewrite your memory while smiling sympathetically across the dinner table. I looked at my daughter sitting there beneath the same chandelier Ellen picked out 20 years earlier, and I realized I had spent months trying to defend myself instead of asking the real question. Why were they working this hard to make me seem unstable in the first place? Melissa stood up suddenly and softened her voice again. "Dad, I am trying to protect you." I looked at her for a long moment and quietly replied, "No, You were trying to prepare something. She froze completely after I said that. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then she grabbed her purse, muttered, "I cannot do this right now," and walked out the front door. I watched her drive away through the living room curtains while evening sunlight stretched across the empty house. Then I walked upstairs, opened the closet, and pulled out the small lockbox where I kept Ellen's old camcorder equipment and spare electronics. And for the first time since all of this started, I stopped thinking about defending myself and started thinking about finding the truth. The next morning, I drove to a hardware store in Bolingbrook and bought 3 indoor security cameras, 2 motion sensors, and a small audio recording system that connected through an app on my phone. The cashier was a young guy with tattoos on both arms who looked barely old enough to rent a car. He scanned the cameras and asked casually, "Big vacation coming up?" I surprised myself by smiling. Something like that. Installing everything took me almost 2 full days because I had not touched most of that kind of equipment since before smartphones existed. I sat at the dining room table wearing reading glasses while watching online tutorials from teenagers explaining wireless setups in bedrooms lit with neon lights. At one point, I accidentally triggered the alarm twice and nearly gave myself a heart attack. But slowly I figured it out. Camera in the office bookshelf. Camera facing the hallway. Small recorder beneath the kitchen cabinet. Motion alerts tied directly to my phone. I even replaced the old deadbolt on the back door myself. It felt good doing something with my hands again. Purpose changes the air inside a house. By Friday afternoon, I had already decided what I was going to do. I called Melissa while standing in the garage beside my truck. "Hey, sweetheart," I said calmly. "I think I am going to visit Frank in Phoenix for a couple weeks." Frank was an old friend from my Air National Guard days. Melissa immediately sounded interested. "Really? Since when?" "He has been asking me for months." "How long would you be gone?" There it was. Directly to logistics. "Maybe 12 days. I heard muffled voices on her end like she had covered the phone briefly to tell Brent. Then she came back sounding brighter than I had heard in months. "Dad, that actually sounds healthy for you." Healthy. Another one of their favorite words. "I think so too," I replied. Then I deliberately added, "I left emergency contact information on the desk downstairs in case anything happens while I am away." Silence for half a second. Tiny, but noticeable. "Okay," she said carefully. "That is smart." The following Monday morning, I loaded 2 bags into my truck while Melissa stood in the driveway hugging me goodbye. She smelled like the same vanilla perfume she wore in high school. For one strange second, I almost canceled the entire plan right there. She looked so normal standing beside my truck smiling sadly at me. "Call me when you get there," she said. "I will." Then she hugged me tighter and whispered, "I just want you safe, Dad." I drove away at exactly 8:15 in the morning. But instead of heading toward the interstate, I circled back through side roads and checked into a small motel in Aurora 20 minutes from home. The room smelled faintly like old carpet cleaner and cigarette smoke buried under years of air freshener. There was a flickering lamp beside the bed and an ice machine outside that rattled every 40 minutes all night long. I sat on the edge of that motel bed staring at my phone for almost an hour before finally opening the security app. At first, nothing happened. Empty kitchen. Quiet hallway. Afternoon sunlight moving slowly across the living room carpet. Then around 6:30 that evening, my phone buzzed. Motion detected. Front door. Melissa walked inside carrying grocery bags. Brent followed behind her with a 12-pack of beer under one arm. Neither of them looked sad. Melissa tossed her purse onto my kitchen counter like she lived there. Brent loosened his tie and immediately opened my refrigerator. "Jesus," he muttered. "He still buys the same old man yogurt." Melissa laughed. Not nervous laughter either. Comfortable laughter. I sat there in that dim motel room watching strangers move through my home wearing my daughter's face. About 20 minutes later, Brent carried his beer upstairs into my bedroom. My bedroom. The room Ellen died in. I watched him sit casually on my side of the bed while scrolling through television channels. Melissa walked in behind him holding one of Ellen's old sweaters from the closet. "Throw this one away too?" she asked. Brent barely looked up from the television. "Yeah, he is never going to notice." I felt my stomach drop, so suddenly I had to set the phone down for a second. Then a few minutes later, while I was still trying to steady my breathing, another notification appeared on the screen. Motion detected. Office. The office camera showed Brent entering first with a flashlight, even though every light in the house was already on. That detail bothered me for some reason. Flashlights are for searching. He walked straight to the bookshelf beside the desk and started pulling folders down while Melissa stood near the doorway, nervously twisting her wedding ring. I do not like this, she whispered. Brent did not even look at her. You like losing the condo more? He snapped quietly. Then he crouched beside the wall safe and said something that changed the way I saw both of them forever. Your father has spent his whole life acting smarter than everybody else. Nobody hides this much paperwork unless they are hiding money. I sat frozen on the motel bed listening through my headphones while the cheap air conditioner rattled beside me. Melissa lowered her voice even more. Just be careful. If he finds out, Brent interrupted her immediately. Finds out what? That his daughter is trying to protect her future? There was something strange about hearing my life discussed like a business transaction, like I had already become paperwork to them. Brent eventually stood up holding a yellow folder from the bottom drawer of my desk. Bingo. Melissa walked closer. What is that? Trust information. Investment accounts too. Papers shuffled loudly through the microphone. Then Brent laughed softly and said, Jesus Christ. How much? Melissa asked. A lot more than you told me. There was a long silence after that. Not emotional silence. Calculating silence. I remember staring at the motel wall while feeling this calmness settle over me that honestly scared me a little. I expected heartbreak, rage, maybe panic. Instead, I just felt awake for the first time in months. Clear. Because once people finally reveal what they think you are worth, you stop wasting energy wondering who they really are. Around midnight, the office camera showed Brent carrying several folders upstairs. Melissa followed behind him holding my spare key box and a legal pad. They stayed awake until nearly 2:30 in the morning going through my financial records at the dining room table beneath the chandelier Ellen loved so much. I listened to every second. At one point, Melissa asked quietly, Do you think he changed the will already? Brent answered, If he did, we need to know now before somebody else gets involved. Somebody else. That was when I finally understood they were not planning around my future. They were planning around my death. The next morning, I drove to a small law office in downtown Naperville, wearing the same navy jacket I used to wear to engineering meetings years ago. I had not worn it since Ellen's funeral. The receptionist looked up and smiled politely. Can I help you? I need to speak with an estate attorney, I said. Today, a man named Daniel Mercer met with me an hour later. Mid-50s. Gray suit. American flag pin on his lapel. Calm eyes. He listened without interrupting while I showed him screenshots from the cameras, recordings from the house, copies of Melissa's emails, and bank call logs. When I finally finished talking, he leaned back slowly and said, Mr. Whitman, your instincts are working just fine. I do not know why that sentence nearly made me cry, but it did. Nobody had said something that simple to me in months. Daniel spent the next 3 hours helping me move accounts into protected structures, update beneficiaries, lock access permissions, and rewrite portions of my estate plan completely. By the time we finished, I felt something returning that I thought grief had taken from me permanently. Control. Before I left, Daniel handed me a black portfolio folder embossed with my full name in gold lettering. Harold J. Whitman. It sounds silly now, but seeing my own name printed neatly on something official felt important. Solid. Real. Like evidence that I still existed. Outside, the version of me Melissa had been quietly building for everyone else. As I stood to leave, Daniel asked carefully, What are you planning to do now? I looked out the office window toward the parking lot where afternoon sunlight reflected off rows of cars and said, I think I finally stopped pretending I do not see what is happening. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. Motion detected, front door. The notification came through while I was still standing outside Daniel Mercer's office building. Motion detected, front door. Then another one immediately after. Motion detected, office. I sat inside my truck with the engine off and opened the camera feed slowly. Melissa was back in the house again, except this time she was not alone. A tall man wearing a black suit stood beside her in the office, flipping through papers on my desk with professional calmness. Not nervous, not sneaky, comfortable, like somebody invited there for a meeting. My chest tightened immediately because I recognized the leather portfolio in his hand. Lawyer. Melissa crossed her arms while watching him search. Dad would never understand any of this paperwork anyway, she muttered quietly. The man adjusted his glasses and asked, Are you certain there is no updated trust? If there is, Brent answered from somewhere off camera. It is hidden. I listened carefully while the lawyer continued scanning documents. If your father is mentally declining the way you described, he said cautiously, timing becomes important. Timing. Such a clean word for such an ugly conversation. I muted the audio for a second and just sat there gripping the steering wheel. Outside, people walked past carrying coffee cups and talking on phones while my family quietly prepared to take control of my life inside my own home. The strangest part was how calm I felt now. A week earlier, I would have been devastated. But something had changed after meeting Daniel. I was no longer reacting emotionally to every betrayal because I finally understood the full picture. They thought they were ahead of me. That gave me an advantage. I drove back to the motel instead of going home. That surprised even me. Old Harold would have stormed into the house demanding explanations. Instead, I ordered bad takeout from a diner next door and spent 3 hours organizing screenshots, recordings, timestamps, and financial records into folders Daniel requested. Around 7 that evening my phone rang. Melissa. I answered calmly. Hey sweetheart. Dad, she said brightly. Too brightly. How is Phoenix? Hot. Did you make it to Frank's place okay? Sure did. She laughed softly. You sound better already. I looked at the live camera feed while she stood in my kitchen saying those words. Fresh air helps, I replied. Then I listened as she casually tested me. Did you remember where you left the trust paperwork before you left? I almost smiled hearing how carefully she phrased it. Why? Just in case there is an emergency while you are gone. What kind of emergency? Silence. Then she pivoted smoothly. Dad, I am just trying to help manage things. Manage things. That phrase echoed in my head long after the call ended. Later that night, I received another call from Diane, my neighbor across the street. She sounded nervous. Harold, I do not want to get involved in family business, but there have been people going in and out of your house all day. What kind of people? Well, your daughter obviously. Her husband too. But there is another man now. Tall guy. Black suit. Briefcase. I stared at the motel television without really seeing it. Did they notice you? No. But something feels off. Then her voice lowered slightly. Harold, they moved boxes into the garage. That made me sit upright immediately. What kind of boxes? File boxes. The kind banks use. I checked the garage camera instantly. 3 white banker boxes sat near my workbench now. Labeled. Organized. Prepared. Like somebody was already inventorying a dead man's estate. Around midnight, another notification appeared. Motion detected. Master bedroom. I opened the feed and saw Melissa sitting alone on my side of the bed, holding one of Ellen's framed photographs in her lap. For a second, she actually looked human again. Sad even. Then she said something quietly toward Brent standing near the doorway that made my stomach turn. Cold. If this goes wrong, we lose everything. Brent answered immediately. Then make sure he never realizes what is happening. I sat there in that dim motel room listening to the air conditioner hum softly while rain started tapping against the window outside. Then my phone buzzed again. Incoming call, Diane. The moment I answered, she whispered frantically, Harold, somebody just pulled into your driveway with police lights. My first thought when Diane mentioned police lights was that Melissa had actually gone through with it. I drove back toward the neighborhood immediately, rain streaking across the windshield while my phone sat mounted beside the steering wheel showing live camera feeds from inside the house. 2 squad cars were parked outside when I turned onto Willow Ridge Drive, but the lights were off now. Quiet. Controlled. I parked half a block away beneath a maple tree and watched from inside the truck. Through the front window, I could see movement inside the living room. Melissa pacing. Brent talking to one of the officers. Calm. Confident. Like they had rehearsed this already. My phone buzzed suddenly. Daniel Mercer. Do not go inside angry, he said immediately after I answered. Go inside prepared. How did you know? You sent me the camera notifications 20 minutes ago. Rain tapped softly against the roof while I watched silhouettes moving through my house. Daniel's voice stayed steady. You already have evidence, Harold. Do not argue. Let them talk. I sat there quietly for a second before asking. What if they try to say I am unstable? Daniel almost sounded amused. Then it is fortunate you documented everything before returning home. I ended the call and looked down at the black portfolio folder resting on the passenger seat beside me. For months, they had treated me like a confused old man slowly drifting out of reality. But tonight was the first time I realized something important. They had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with anymore. I walked toward the house, slowly through the drizzle. One of the officers noticed me first. "Sir," he called carefully. "Can I help you?" "I live here," I replied. The officer looked surprised immediately. "Mr. Whitman?" "Yes." Behind him, through the open doorway, I saw Melissa go completely pale. Brent's expression changed too, but only for half a second. Then his salesman smile returned instantly. "Harold," he said loudly. "Thank God you are okay." I stepped into my own living room and took off my wet jacket carefully while the officers watched all of us. The taller officer cleared his throat awkwardly. "Sir, your daughter reported concerns about your mental state after you disappeared unexpectedly." Disappeared. Interesting word considering Melissa thought I was in Arizona. I looked directly at her. "You told police I disappeared?" Melissa folded her arms tightly. "Dad, nobody could reach you. You spoke to me yesterday." Silence. Brent stepped forward smoothly. "Harold, everybody has just been worried. Enough to bring police into my home." Neither of them answered. I noticed the white banker boxes still stacked near the garage entrance. My financial records were sitting right there in plain sight. One of the officers followed my gaze and frowned slightly. "Sir," he asked carefully, "why are your documents boxed up?" Brent jumped in immediately. "We were organizing things for him." I nodded slowly. Without permission. Another silence. Calmness makes dishonest people nervous. That was something I learned years ago negotiating construction contracts. The less emotional you become, the more room liars need to fill with explanations. Melissa finally spoke, and for the first time her voice sounded shaky. "Dad, we thought you needed help." I reached into the portfolio folder slowly and removed several printed screenshots from the cameras. Then I handed them to the taller officer one by one. Melissa standing in my office. Brent searching my safe. The attorney in the black suit reviewing my financial records. Timestamped. Dated. Quiet filled the room immediately except for rain tapping against the windows. The officer studied the pages carefully before looking up at Brent. "Sir, did you have permission to access these files?" Brent opened his mouth, but nothing came out at first. Melissa stared at me like she was seeing a stranger, standing in front of her. And honestly, maybe she was. I looked at her calmly and said, "You spent months convincing people I could not tell what was real anymore." Her eyes filled instantly. "Dad," I shook my head gently. "No, let us not do that part tonight." The shorter officer finally spoke up. "Mr. Whitman, would you like these individuals removed from the property?" Individuals. Not family. Not daughter. Individuals. Melissa looked like she had just been slapped by the word. Brent stepped closer to her protectively now, but I noticed something important for the first time. He was nervous. Truly nervous. I set the final document on the coffee table carefully. It was a transcript from the audio recorder hidden beneath the kitchen cabinet. Melissa glanced down at the highlighted sentence near the bottom of the page. Then I watched all the color drain from her face as she realized exactly which words I had heard. The room stayed quiet for several seconds after Melissa saw the transcript. I could actually hear the grandfather clock ticking from the hallway again. Brent leaned forward first, trying to read over her shoulder, but Melissa pulled the page back instinctively, like touching it burned. The highlighted line sat there in black ink exactly the way Daniel printed it earlier that afternoon. "I am tired of waiting for him to die." Nobody needed to ask where it came from because the timestamp and transcript header were printed clearly across the top of the page. Kitchen audio device 3. Recorded 7:42 p.m. Melissa's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Brent recovered first, of course. Men like Brent always recover fast. "Harold," he said carefully, lowering his voice into that fake reasonable tone again. "You secretly recorded your own daughter?" I looked directly at him. "You searched my safe." One of the officers cleared his throat awkwardly and stepped back toward the doorway, giving us space without fully leaving. Melissa still had not looked up at me yet. She just stared down at that sentence like she was trying to separate herself from it somehow. Finally, she whispered, "Dad, I did not mean it the way it sounds." That almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because there are certain sentences in life that only exist one way. You cannot rearrange them into kindness afterward. I sat down slowly in Ellen's old armchair across from the couch, while rain continued tapping softly against the windows. "Then explain it to me," I said calmly. Melissa looked up finally, and for the first time in months I saw fear instead of control. "We were drowning," she admitted quietly. Brent immediately turned toward her. Melissa. No. She snapped softly without taking her eyes off me. He already knows. The room shifted after that. The performance ended. Melissa wiped at her face quickly and said, the condo was underwater. Brent lost 2 clients last year. Credit cards were maxed out. We thought if you sold the house. You thought if I became dependent enough? I corrected quietly. You could take control before I noticed. Her silence answered for her. Brent stepped forward again, trying to stabilize things. Nobody was trying to hurt you. I nodded toward the banker boxes near the garage door. Then why were my financial records packed, like an estate sale? He had no answer this time. Melissa finally whispered. It was supposed to happen slowly. Those 6 words hurt more than the recordings did. Slowly, carefully, patiently, like managing a project. I leaned back in the chair and suddenly noticed how tired she looked. Not evil, not monstrous, just hollowed out by years of resentment and panic and bad decisions. That was the worst part, honestly. There was no dramatic movie villain standing in my living room. Just my daughter making selfish choices, one compromise at a time, until she crossed a line she could not uncross. One of the officers finally spoke gently. Mr. Whitman, do you wish to file a report regarding unauthorized access to your documents? Melissa looked at me immediately after hearing that. Not angry, terrified. I could see her realizing this had moved beyond family manipulation and into consequences. I thought about it for a long moment before shaking my head slowly. No, Brent exhaled quietly in relief. But then I continued. However, they are leaving tonight. Melissa's face crumpled slightly. Dad, no more keys, I said softly. No more entering this house without permission. No more speaking to banks, lawyers, doctors, or anyone else on my behalf. Brent opened his mouth again, but I cut him off before he could start. And if I ever find either of you inside this house again without my consent, I will file charges immediately. The officer nodded once, like he respected the clarity of that. Melissa stood there clutching her purse tightly against her chest while tears rolled down her face silently. I was scared, she whispered. I know, I answered. But you stopped seeing me as your father a long time ago. That landed hard enough that she physically flinched. Nobody moved for several seconds after that. Finally, Brent picked up the banker boxes one by one, while Melissa stared around the living room like she was seeing the house differently now. Before leaving, she paused near the doorway and looked back at me carefully. Are you ever going to forgive me? She asked quietly. I looked past her toward the dark, rainy street outside and answered honestly. I do not know yet. Then she walked out into the rain, and for the first time since Ellen died, the house finally felt completely silent. 3 months after that night, the house felt different in ways I still struggle to explain. Not happier exactly, just honest. Quiet no longer felt heavy inside those walls because the pretending had stopped. I changed the locks 2 days after Melissa left. I donated half the furniture upstairs. I even repainted the office a lighter color because Ellen always hated the dark wood panels, and for years I kept them only because I was too stubborn to change anything she picked. Funny how grief works sometimes. You hold on to objects because you are afraid letting go means losing the person too. But peace does not come from freezing your life in place. It comes from learning how to carry love forward without letting it trap you in the past. Melissa and I did not speak for almost 7 weeks. Then one Sunday afternoon, I received a handwritten letter in the mail. No excuses, no manipulation, just a short note saying she was in therapy. Now and finally beginning to understand how fear and resentment had changed her into someone she barely recognized. She wrote, I think somewhere along the way I stopped seeing you as a person and started seeing you as the answer to every problem in my life. I read that sentence 3 times sitting at the kitchen table beside a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. I did not respond right away. Healing does not happen because somebody suddenly says the correct words. Trust grows slowly after it breaks. Like bone, crooked if you rush it. Still, I mailed her a short letter back 2 weeks later. 4 sentences. That was all. I told her I loved her. I told her boundaries were not punishment. I told her forgiveness and access were not the same thing. And I told her I hoped she became someone she could respect again someday. Daniel helped me finalize the new estate documents shortly after that. Most of the money was placed into a protected trust for my granddaughter Emma's education and future. The house itself will eventually go to a veterans housing program outside Chicago after I am gone. When Daniel asked if I was sure, I surprised myself by saying yes without hesitation. Because the truth is, that house stopped feeling like a legacy the moment people began measuring my death against its market value. These days I spend a lot of mornings driving north toward Lake Geneva with the windows down and old jazz music playing softly through the truck speakers. Last month, I rented a small lakeside cabin for the summer. Nothing fancy, just pine trees, a wooden dock, black coffee at sunrise, and enough silence to finally hear my own thoughts again without somebody else trying to rewrite them. Sometimes Melissa calls now. The conversations are cautious but real. No hidden agendas. No fake concern. Just two flawed people trying to figure out whether something broken can still become something honest. Maybe it can. Maybe it cannot. I have learned that not every relationship survives the truth, but every person deserves to survive discovering it. If there is one thing this experience taught me, it is that your instincts matter more than people want you to believe. When something feels wrong deep in your gut, pay attention. Especially when someone keeps trying to convince you not to trust your own eyes, your own memory, or your own voice. Protect your finances. Protect your peace. Protect your name. And most importantly, protect the part of yourself that still knows who you are when the world starts speaking over you. I also learned something else. Loneliness can make people vulnerable, but vulnerability is not weakness. There is no shame in aging, no shame in needing help. The danger comes when you surrender your dignity just to keep the peace around people who benefit from your silence. I believe God, or maybe just life itself, gives us small warnings long before disaster arrives. Little moments, little feelings, little pauses in conversations that tell us something is off. We ignore them because we want love to feel safe. But real love does not require you to shrink yourself to stay accepted. So if somebody listening tonight feels trapped inside a family situation that quietly chips away at your self-worth, please hear me when I say this. You are not difficult for wanting respect. You are not paranoid for noticing patterns. And you are not selfish for creating boundaries that allow you to breathe again. My name is Harold Whitman. I am 72 years old, and the most important lesson I can leave with you is this. Never let someone else convince you that your value depends on how useful you are to them. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. Truly, stories like this are hard to tell because once you speak the truth out loud, you cannot hide from it anymore. But maybe that is also where healing begins. And if this story meant something to you, I hope you will leave a comment sharing where you are listening from tonight, because no matter how isolated life can feel sometimes, none of us are as alone as we think we are. And if you want to walk with me a little longer, there are more stories waiting in this playlist. More families. More quiet betrayals. More people learning the hard way that survival is not just about enduring pain, but understanding your own worth before somebody else tries to define it for you. Some of those stories end with heartbreak. Some end with forgiveness. But all of them begin the same way, with somebody finally deciding they deserve better than silence.